At 40,000 feet, traveling at over 1,000 miles an hour, there's no pause button. One wrong decision and it's over. This week I'm sitting down with Mandy Hickson, the first woman to fly the Tornado GR4 fighter jet on the front line. She spun out of control.
Almost couldn't process what was going on. My navigator yelled, "I'm not ejecting yet."
She's been shot at without warning.
I remember my nav just suddenly out of nowhere just yelled, "Brake right!"
And she's felt the weight of failure when in combat.
I went into freeze mode, completely froze.
Because in the air, decision making isn't a luxury, it's survival. And the truth is, business, leadership, life are not all that different.
If you sit there in your comfort zone for the whole of your life, when something happens, you won't be able to cope with it, I can guarantee.
I'm Louis Alexander. Welcome to If You Can. Mandy, welcome to If You Can. We are incredibly honoured to have you here. I remember reading your first book, An Officer Not a Gentleman, back in 2021, and it's an incredible full circle moment to actually be sat with you 5 years later.
It's my honour, it really is.
Can we start with this? I'm aware the mission of this show is we want to deliver practical lessons to our audience. Those who may be athletes or musicians, actors, they could be anything. They may not be fighter jet pilots or adventurers, but we're aware that anyone can learn from anyone on this show. But to start with, I think lots of us have quite different understandings of what it even means to be in a cockpit of a fighter jet. Can you take us to that sensation, the sounds, the feelings, the smells? Can you just run us through what it actually feels like to be in that cockpit? And then we can go into your journey of how you even got there,
Absolutely.
The lessons you learned, and everything you've achieved since.
Yeah, of course. So it's a really interesting environment, really, in some ways. And this is going to sound like a strange word because this becomes your office. So wherever you're flying in the world, you're still sitting in your office space. Which is sort of a weird one to get your head around. It just so happens that your office is going at 520 miles an hour, at whatever height it's going at. It's quite a small space as well. The smallest cockpit I've ever sat in was the Hawk, which is what the Red Arrows fly in. So that was our training aircraft, and I did, a few hundred hours in training to become a Tornado GR4 pilot. So when I got into the Tornado aircraft, it felt a bit more spacious. I think it even bizarrely had an ashtray at one point in the back, which is hilarious. At some point in the 1980s when it was designed, you were allowed to have a cigarette with the oxygen masks here. Anyway, I don't think that's the best call. But the actual cockpit is, when you look at it, it is a mass of instruments, technology. You've got different pieces of equipment that are going to help you, everything from radar homing and warning receivers to forward-looking infrared to terrain-following radar to a head-up display, a moving map. So when you look around, it can feel a bit overwhelming. But there's an amazing smell, which is avgas, which is the smell of freedom, quite frankly, I always say. There are different people that describe it in different ways, but as soon as I smell that smell, I know I've arrived to work, basically. But it's incredible. I remember taking off in my first ever Tornado flight. And firstly, I walked out to the aircraft and I managed to hit my head very hard, which I didn't actually tell the instructor, because the tail fin of the Tornado happened to sit exactly at my eye line. And I had my helmet in my hand. And when I walked out, of course, it wasn't getting any movement. It's not like I was going past something, it was moving. It was sitting exactly there. And I walked straight up and went, boing, and basically almost knocked myself out cold. And I had this line as a bruise that swelled. And of course, I had to put my helmet on. I was like, yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah. Thinking, my gosh, what have I done? There was no way I was missing the trip. But that first flight where you sit at the end of the runway and you light the burners and you're thrust back into your seat and you get about 2G of lateral acceleration down a runway. So the closest I would ever describe it to any of the listeners would be Thorpe Park stealth. Those sort of roller coasters where you go from 0 to 180 kilometres an hour in 2 seconds. So you're thrust up and they just do one loop. They do one wing over and land back again, 11 seconds they normally last for. But for this, obviously it's lasting for about an hour and a half. And I landed off the flight and I just had this grin on my face. And I remember thinking, and I even wrote it, I think, in the first book, is this a permanent fixture from now on, or is this just a fast jet thing? But it was an incredible experience and one that I'll never forget that day.
You mentioned there the word freedom.
Yeah.
What does freedom mean to you?
Freedom, that's what actually flying always has given me, actually, that sense of freedom. And I remember being a very young girl at the age of 13 and taking off. And someone described it to me as it's like dancing in the clouds. And actually that was it. So if you're in a small propeller aeroplane, and you're sort of coasting through the clouds and obviously staying away from the clouds because obviously that might not be legal, but you're going around the clouds, keeping, sight of the surface. And it's this amazing feeling of just pure and utter freedom. It's where the world and its worries disappear. You can be anybody you want. And I love the fact it was challenging. I love the fact there's risk, but I also love that sense of freedom.
It's interesting because you found freedom, as you said, up there, but actually, I hope you don't mind me talking about this, at home and on the ground, you had a huge amount of barriers stopping the freedom for when you joined the university.
Nicely done. Nice. You've done this before, haven't you, you see?
I'm learning. But you had huge barriers.
Yeah.
At the time, women weren't allowed to fly fast jet aircraft.
Yeah, I mean, it was...
So can you take us through that journey of where the world was at the time, where the Royal Air Force was, and how you essentially persevered through?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. When you think back to, say, the Second World War, and we've got the ATA girls, the auxiliary transport pilots, and all these women were ferrying Spitfires and different aircraft, Harvards and Oxfords, all around the country. And then, of course, the war ended and women couldn't be pilots. And they didn't fly for another 50 years, which is madness. Then in the early 1990s, the rules changed and allowed women to fly on the front line. Julie Gibson was our first female pilot. I had first been interested in flying at the age of 13 by joining the Air Cadets. So I wasn't from a privileged background. I was growing up in Manchester. I joined the Air Cadets on the first night they opened their doors to girls. I flew with them. And I remember so clearly saying to the pilot, "Excuse me, sir, do you get paid for this?" And he sort of looked at me and laughed and said, "Well, of course I do, it's my job." But he also used this word passion and purpose. And this was probably the first time in my life I'd ever heard anyone linking a career with passion and purpose. Because I'd always been surrounded by people who went to work because they had to earn money, like the majority of the world do. And in that moment, when I heard him say that, I thought, well, that's what I want to do. And I set my sights really high on flying fast jets. But as you rightly said, Louis, women weren't allowed to be pilots in the Air Force at all, because this was early 1980s. And also the competition's brutal to become a pilot. So I carried on pursuing this impossible dream and chipping away at it. And I remember my mum saying to me, if it's going to be someone, Mandy, when they change the rules, why shouldn't it be you? And it was a really lovely way of her sort of taking the pressure off me in some ways. But do everything that you can that's going to put you in the right position when things might change. And that's exactly what I did. I took every leadership opportunity. I mean, I absolutely loved school. I was one of those sort of slightly, I wouldn't say girly swats, but I worked hard at school. I was head girl. I was in the Air Cadets. I was in the Guides, the Rangers. I think that's because there was no social media or basically technology out there, and I got bored easily. So I just joined everything. But all the skills that you learn, actually, interestingly, by doing all those extracurricular stuff at school, holds you in really good stead, gives you a sense of adventure. We don't need to talk to you about that. But it also, I did loads of hiking, Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, that gave me a sense of service, interestingly, by doing the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, because you would end up going into care homes, you would end up doing community projects. The hikes, you end up doing all the expeditions. I absolutely loved them. And that gave me that sense of what I wanted to do as well. And I think what it's doing is just building all of these, like different skills outside of academia that are going to hold you in good stead for a very different career.
But how did you have that passion for life at such an early age to do all those things? Because the way you explained it there made it sound quite easy. But I'm aware there's lots of children out there who don't have that passion to, whether it's to get outdoors or even to get into a classroom. What would your advice be for those from the younger generation who need to learn to step out, need to challenge themselves and take on these obstacles?
I think it's a realisation that the only place you actually grow is when you're on the edge of your capability or edge of your comfort zone. Says me talking to this guy who's achieved so much. I'm almost embarrassed to say that, but you know that. on one of the expeditions I did, it was to Kilimanjaro. I remember Jo Bradshaw, who was our expedition leader, she just said, this is grade 3 fun. There will be no fun in this moment, but you will look back on this moment and you will see such personal growth. And I remember that really resonating with me, because I think we never learn anything when we're sitting in the comfortable zone in our offices. You're not really learning when you're just carrying on in a job that you've been doing forever. But when you take that leap of faith and that courage it takes to step into uncertainty, to feel that fear, and I'm going to use the phrase, and do it anyway, that is courage. And I think it's too easy with technology around for us to never get bored at home as a young person. We just sit there watching YouTube, watching Instagram, scrolling, doom scrolling. And actually, that's not real life. What that is doing is planting a seed that everyone's had it easy, that they're all influencers, that it's all come to everybody. And that is not the reality. As you and I both know, if you want to pursue a big dream, it's going to take really a lot of hard work. And there's going to be loads and loads of failure points. But again, there was a really wise gentleman that said to me, not stumbling blocks, but stepping stones. And I love that, reframing it, because, you know, when something comes up, like you don't get a sponsor or something like that, it's easy to think, oh gosh, there's no way forward. But if you just think, right, I'm going to climb on top of that stepping stone and now look what I can get to. And that's really what I did. I mean, I applied for flying scholarships. I was awarded one in the end after I was told I was obese, which was interesting. I had to lose 3.5 stone because their height charts for women went up to 5'9", and I was 6 foot tall.
So they were different for men and women at the time?
Yeah, and they just had never had a 6 foot woman applying to the Air Force. So they said, oh, we only go up to about 5'9". You should be 9.5 stone. Well, I mean, that's just to give you perspective, that's 3.5 stone less than I am now. And they told me I was obese. So I was told I was obese at this stage, which is crazy. Yeah. But we didn't challenge authority in those days. You know, now we're always taught that our voices are important and it's important to challenge. In those days, when someone from authority spoke to us, we sort of just agreed and we just went with it. And that's what we did. Even my parents sort of went, oh, well, you must be obese. It's crazy. I was playing county sport. How could I have been? But I lost all the weight. That's how determined I was. You know, whilst doing my A-levels, I remember going onto a diet of literally chicken and broccoli, and that's all I ate for 4 months, and I lost the 3.5 stone. Whilst going to the gym before school, after school, I got the flying scholarship. I used my newspaper round money that I'd saved up to pay for the additional 10 hours, got my private pilot's licence, went off to university, and then I thought, well, how can I keep my licence current? I'll join the University Air Squadron. Great way to see whether the military is a fit for you whilst not committing. I joined it. I loved it. Oh, my goodness. And not only did I love the flying from that, but I also loved the camaraderie. I loved the teamwork. I loved the leadership. I loved the military. And at that point, that's when I was like, right, I really wanted to join. But still, women weren't allowed to be fast jet pilots. So I had to wait for my second year at uni, then they changed the rules.
What was that moment like when you found out the news?
Unbelievable. I was sitting in a bar, I remember. I was sitting with 2 other females that were on the squadron with me, and the boss walked in and he said, girls, I've got the best news in the world. They are finally allowing women to become fast jet pilots. And we all went, oh my gosh. I think 2 of us put our papers in the next day to see if we could apply to join.
Did it feel like, at that point you've had so much against you, almost the whole system, as you said, from little things like your weight, which was ridiculous, to this, that, almost everything's against you. Did that feel like that moment, that it was worth it, that almost that you'd been fighting for that reason, like your mum said, if someone's going to do it, it's going to be you, Mandy. Did you feel like that was that moment where almost, this is it? It's
an interesting one, isn't it? Because I'd love to just say, yes, it was, and it felt like a battle. But right. I think when you're young, you're just a bit naive, and you just keep on doing things, and you don't realise that you're, you know, breaking down barriers. You don't realise that you're at the vanguard of change. You're just a 19-year-old that's pursuing a dream to fly. You're just a 19-year-old that's climbing Kilimanjaro for the first time, to do so in honour of your grandpa. You know, so it's all of these things that we just do them because you're young. But when you look back, you can reflect that, yeah, you had probably done them and you had hit challenge after challenge. And actually, when we talk about resilience, and, you know, you've probably got the degree in resilience, but we realise that all of these failures and all of these challenges are just building up our pool of resilience. But if we tie a sense of purpose in, that when we're talking about resilience, if we have purpose and a direct idea, a direct goal of what we want to do, when you hit all those setbacks, you work out a way of doing it anyway, because you are so driven. And that is how we become more and more resilient.
Those two words, passion and purpose, you mentioned earlier on, which the first time you heard it when you was younger, I guarantee there's someone listening right now, probably multiple people who are experiencing that first thing listening to you, passion and purpose.
Well,
this is the reason I started this show, was to interview people I admire, genuinely admire, and actually ask them what I want to ask, and share that with those who don't have this privilege to sit down with people like you.
Oh, well, thank you.
Can you take us to, once you'd got through the Royal Air Force, you'd gone through that whole journey of training, which I can only imagine is one of the most difficult things to do, that first mission?
Yeah, the first mission, I do remember it actually. So when people talk about going to a war zone, you might think that we would be full of fear, that you're feeling danger. That's actually not what you're feeling. There's a sense of, it's not that you're bloodthirsty, it's just that if you can imagine you've been training to play rugby or football for the whole of your life and you've only ever sat on the bench. When you finally go and deploy to an area of conflict, you're finally doing the job that you've been trained to do. And there is a sense of pride that comes with that. And there's a sense of belief and confidence that all of the training has taken you to this point. However, I do remember sitting, and I can take myself right back to this moment. We were called in, and our squadron out there at the time, so we were based in a place called Ali Al Salem. It's just been in the news quite recently, actually, for other reasons. But we were defending the no-fly zone over southern Iraq in the build-up to Gulf War II. And we had been primarily involved in reconnaissance missions. So the Tornado GR4 had lots of different sensors on where we could take photos and give that intelligence to troops on the ground. And then I got called in and they said, "Oh, Mandy, it's not a reconnaissance mission. This is actually going to be a bombing mission." And apparently my eyes literally went like that proverbial rabbit in the spotlights, you know, if you're driving down a country lane at night. And I remember a guy called Matt, and he just went, "I've never seen anyone just look quite so shocked." And I was like, right, okay. And I'd done a couple of training sorties to get used to flying out in that temperature, because it was really hot. You're talking about early 40s, top end 30s, early 40s, no air conditioning on the ground. So you're really, it's like sitting in a greenhouse before you get airborne. And so that was going to be my first mission, and we planned it. And one of the most stressful things when you're flying, ironically, it's nothing to do with the flying. You have a secure radio called the Have-Quick radio, and it's so that you can go onto secure comms once you're airborne, and it can't be scrambled or anything like that. And putting all the information, you got 20 codes, 20 different number sets that you had to put into this radio. And the radio is not in a good position. It's like back here. So if you can imagine, you've got these 20 codes that are on your knee pad, and you're looking, you're going like 2794. You're looking back here and you're going 2794. And it's the most uncomfortable position. You've got all your helmet on, you've got combat survival waistcoat, you've got a life support jacket on, you've got all your flying kit on, you've got your helmet on, and you're trying to look back here and put these numbers in. If you don't get all of them in time, then you get kicked out the system and you miss your slot and you won't get airborne. So that was the most stressful. Whilst you're sweating profusely and there's sweat going into your eyes and you're pressing these buttons, and then it suddenly goes, do, 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 and you go, "I'm in. Hallelujah." That was the most stressful bit, getting these numbers in. And then once we were airborne, we were on the mission, and I remember we were on the final turning in to drop our weapons. It was we were tracking a big weapon site. And it was called a response option 3, so it was a RO3, which is, it's not a priority target, but it's of great subsequence if you get it correct for the war. Anyway, we were on the way in towards it, and we couldn't locate it. We couldn't find it. And basically, if you can imagine, there's berms around, it's a desert, things are covered, and I was on the right track. We were running in, and all my switches were live, and my navigator just said, "Knock it off, knock it off, knock it off. Switches all go safe." And we pulled off the target, and I was like, "Have I done something wrong?" And he said, "Absolutely not. You've done nothing wrong at all." But I couldn't positively identify the target. And do you know what? It made me feel really proud, because when you're not wanting to go just to drop weapons, that is not what you're doing. You're going off to do a job, but what you have is discipline. And that discipline sits with you. And the fact that he is happy to say, no, I can't positively identify the target. That's absolutely fine. I don't want to go dropping a weapon the way it's going to potentially injure somebody or at worst kill them who is a civilian. You know, that is not what you're doing the job for. And so that's something I was really proud of, the discipline that was exhibited by every single one of my squadron when we're out there.
Mandy's someone who really understands the importance of precision, much like our friends at Bob, who have engineered this. This is their reusable body wash for men. It's good for the planet, it's good for your skin, and they're on a mission to redefine how we wash. I've been using my Bob for nearly a year now, since my last world record out in Australia when I ran 8 marathons in all 8 Australian capital cities in 6 days, 23 hours and 40 minutes. And I can't recommend it enough. The team at Bob, that's Mike, Will and Max, have done an incredible job in creating something unique, useful and easy to use. I would encourage you to click the link in the description and take a look at Bob for yourself. Big thank you to them for making this conversation with Mandy happen. Let's get back to it. I can imagine your training prepares you for everything technically, and you go through everything to become literally the best in the business. That's what you are.
Yeah.
But you mentioned discipline there, but how does your mind evolve during that training to get you ready for that first mission, you know, in terms of fear and responsibility, because you're so young, in charge of this aircraft, which has this huge power, right, to defend, as you said. How does your mind start to prepare, and how does it evolve during those early years?
I think it's a really good question, actually, because I think they don't really prepare you. You want to be a fast jet pilot because you want to be the best. You want to fly fast jets. It's brilliant. It's like the childhood dream. The reality is that you're going to kill people in a war zone. Where is the training that gets your mindset into the right frame of mind to say, I can actually do that? And the answer is probably not as much as you think. But you're still wanting to be the best. So going through flying training, you're always wanting to be really competitive, the top of your course, you know, fly the jets, do this. But the reality is it's very different. And there is a bit of me that looks back and thinks there probably wasn't enough training to talk about the psychological effects that war would have on people, which I think has led to a lot of mental health issues with a lot of my friends and my colleagues. I fortunately have not had, touch wood, too many, and that's more through luck, I think, than anything else. But actually, that failure, that is a really big part of it, and that fear that you might feel as well. So fear is a really interesting word. Fear of letting a team down is more important to me, bizarrely, than fear of being shot down. But fear, when you are in that moment and you're about to launch a mission into a war zone, and you may feel like, oh my goodness, am I good enough? All of those doubts, what you have to just do is think, the training has got me to this point. And you just go back, and we would always have this thing when we're flying, it's got, my next event is. And if you think about it, so if I'm flying low level and I go past a turning point, I'd go, my next event is that turning point. What I need to do is go onto this heading, the wind is from the right, I need to, and so it's almost like you break it down. So what can feel like a really impossible task, you just break it down into my next event is. So whenever I started to feel that fear and think bigger picture, it's getting too much, I just go, your training's got you to this point, your procedures are there, your next event is this, do that well, execute that mission well, and then the next thing would be that. And that's what I always did.
I think fear is an interesting topic, isn't it? In many ways. There's an assumption in my world as an adventurer that you must be fearless to go into the jungles and mountains and deserts. But I disagree with that totally. I've experienced a huge amount of fear and nerves on all my expeditions because I care so deeply. I also do these things because I want to live, not to die. But something I'll talk about in my talks and when I visit schools or businesses, whatever it is actually it's okay to experience fear. Sometimes we can turn that fear into focus. It can become almost our superpower, our fuel, whatever you want to call it. Do you need to be fearless to be a fighter jet pilot?
Absolutely not. No, I would say definitely not. I think you'd be inhuman if you did not feel fear. I mean, I think fear is the body's indicator that you're about to go and do something that is risky. And it's basically a great barometer. It means you're going to have some adrenaline. You're going to have to switch on. You're going to have to really, really think about what you're going to do. You're going to have to do some great risk assessments up there. All of those things that in that fight or flight freeze moment where we talk about. But fear is a really good indicator that you're operating at the edge there. But it shouldn't necessarily stop you from doing it, but it means that you're going to be much more switched on. And it also means you care. I always think that.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Do you have a moment during your career you'd be comfortable to tell us where you did go through that fight or flight experience or freeze moments, and how you decided to act and why?
Yeah. There was one moment actually when I was in Canada, and I only had about 30 hours on the Tornado at this point, and we deployed over to Canada to do some training. And I was doing air combat training with a really good friend of mine, Rob, or Puppy. He's in the book quite a few times actually. He's still a great friend of mine. He was the youngest on the squadron and had boundless energy, hence his call sign of Puppy. And we were doing an air combat mission training, and to get the mission to count as one of our training sorties, we had to have done a certain amount of merges, think Top Gun basically, don't go below the hard deck and all of that stuff. And that's exactly what we were doing, trying to shoot each other down. And the weather suddenly became really, really poor. Like, I am talking terrible. This thunderstorm came in, and we heard back from air traffic control, and they said, you probably need to recover now actually, the weather's really deteriorating here. If we didn't get this last merge in, which we were literally about to start, the sortie wouldn't have counted. And you know that you want to get these sorties to count because you want to qualify quicker and all the rest of it. So we made a call with our instructor that we'd finish this merge quickly and then we'd go back to base. So we're now on slightly less fuel than we should be. The weather is deteriorating. It's like the perfect storm. We would call it the Swiss cheese model, where basically, if you can imagine, you've got all of these threats that are coming in, and we put these layers of cheese in place but unfortunately, those cheese slices or defences have got holes in like Swiss cheese. Like, think of what's that one? Not Edam. What's the one that's got holes in? Anyway, just run with me on this one. Run with me on my Swiss cheese model.
We're with you.
And eventually all the holes in our Swiss cheese align, and that's when you have an incident. And this was the holes aligning. And basically, minimum fuel coming in, thick cloud. They say to me, will you accept a talk down from a trainee from the air traffic control tower? And I said, absolutely, because I am 30 hours in, I am invincible. I'm also incredibly naive and stupid. And so I'm coming in with a talk down, and it's a precision approach radar, which means that air traffic control are going to give me instructions to turn left or right. I'm completely on their guidance. And I'm in thick cloud, and I'm just doing it, looking at my instruments. And I hopefully would pop out of cloud at my minimum height would be 200 feet, and I'd be able to be lined up with the runway. I could just land and put my wheels down. Well, we were coming down, and normally in the final stages, you'd have 1 degree left, 2 degrees right. I was getting 10 degrees left, 15 degrees right. And I'm thinking, this is not sounding good on minimum fuel. I'm thinking, oh gosh, never mind. I'd pop out of cloud at 200 feet dead on. I'm not lined up with the runway. The runway's over here. I'm lined up with the apron where all the aircraft are all parked. I thought, oh no, never mind. I'm the girl. I can get this aircraft down. So I pull the aircraft over, do a massive bank at 200 feet, line up with the runway. And we've been told that if the runway was flooded, this is a really unusual situation, that half of that runway, because it's so wide, Goose Bay in Canada, that half of it was ridged and had these ridges, and half of it was smooth. And they said, if it's ever flooded and contaminated, we would call it, land on the ridge side, because now you're going to get some purchase and not skid. I've completely forgotten about that. And, never do you land on one side of the runway. You always try and land in the middle. So I am the girl. I pull it over. I land smack on the middle. Like, hey, whacked in my thrust reverse to slow down. And the wheels that were on the wet side where it's smooth suddenly spun through 120 degrees. And we started going backwards down the runway. I went into freeze mode, completely froze, and almost couldn't process what was going on. My navigator yelled, "I'm not ejecting yet," which wasn't the most positive thing I've ever heard. But he also then said loss of directional control on the runway, which is brilliant. That's a drill. That's a drill I've practiced. That is a drill I know what to do. It's an emergency procedure. So instantly he said the words, which is our reaction, and then I did the drill, which is rock inboard, go to right, and we came to a standstill. So we didn't have to eject, and we're now lined up with the runway. But what was interesting was that this is how overwhelmed I was, and this is where my brain was just in complete overload. My thrust reverse, unbeknownst to me, I'd actually had it was still in at idle. So when I powered up to power off the runway, we just started going backwards. And I was like, oh my God, why are we going backwards? And he said, because your thrust reverse is in, you stupid somebody. And I was like, oh, okay, of course it is. And I sort of cracked it off thrust reverse and then powered forward. And But I was just in such overwhelm, I couldn't work out why I was going backwards. I thought, I don't know, I thought my hook had come down and I'd caught a cable and it was pulling me or something. It's crazy, isn't it? But that was a moment where I recognised, his experience probably helped me in the back seat. The working as a team, procedures, training. And yes, you do have fear, and yes, you do get that freeze. We would call that shock and startle in the aviation world. Wow. But we're given techniques to try to get over it pretty quickly.
Is there a lesson for those of us listening who may never be in that? I
don't
appreciate
fly
that's
a fast jet and
position.
don't let the holes align in your Swiss cheese, basically.
But is there a lesson there on how to stay calm in those moments, how to almost instill a drill into our own lives, whether it's something we're going through in an office, in a work setting, or whether it's during someone's first marathon or whatever it may be? Is there a lesson we can take home?
I mean, I think we always say train hard, fight easy, and that's exactly what we do. So if you sit there in your comfort zone for the whole of your life, when something happens, you won't be able to cope with it, I can guarantee, because you've never experienced it. But if you push yourself a little bit and you learn to experience things that are maybe a little bit more risky, then ultimately when they happen, it doesn't feel as hard as it would do. It could be that preparation really helps you for that. So you've got a really big presentation coming up, not you personally, but whoever has a big presentation coming up, and they think, I should practice it, and they'll do it once or twice. No, I can suggest you do it 20 times, because you know what you want to do is you don't want to say, we rise to the occasion. Absolutely not. You want to be able to default to your training so that the occasion rises to where you are, because adrenaline will push you. So if you're sort of working at an 80% and you go into that room to do your presentation, that 20% will be consumed with adrenaline. But if you have got it to the point where you know exactly what you're saying, you know how slick it is, you've anticipated questions that are going to come up, you've gone through all permutations, you're now at a 60. So your adrenaline is only taking to 80. So I've now got capacity to cope.
How did you learn that?
That's training. That literally is training. I think that's the only thing that you can do. And even now, practice, preparation. If I've got a speech, I mean, I do fly a little bit more by the seat of my pants nowadays, I'll be honest. But in the olden days when I first started presenting, I had practiced what I was going to say so often. It didn't help me in my first ever speech though, because it was still appalling. And I had it written on cards, and I remember going, and then I was shot up by a surface-to-air missile. It was awful. That was a learning point. We all have to go through that. So terrible first presentation, told ditch the cards, and I've never used cards in a presentation since.
I can resonate. My first talk, I was 22. It was for a brand new sponsor, and I had essentially a salary offered in front of me should that talk go well.
No pressure.
And I didn't sleep a minute the night before.
Yeah.
I genuinely had like the shakes the whole night. And I remember doing the exact same thing. I read off a piece of paper, and I've never done that again since, because you just lose everything, the story, the emotion,
absolutely.
the human connection.
Yeah.
What's your relationship with complacency? I'm aware that doing what you've done, which is, again, something which is hard to resonate with for so many of us, but you have always to be switched on. You have to always have that total 100%, because you have so much responsibility and power and everything with your decisions and your actions. But how do we avoid complacency?
I mean, complacency when you're flying, it literally is the biggest killer. They often say it's around the 1,000-hour mark is when people hit about 1,000 hours. They sort of go, I'm pretty good at this, seen most of the things before, done most of the things. That ultimately they become complacent, and that's when accidents happen every single time. And so I think just to try to avoid complacency is by putting yourself, I hate to say it again, outside the comfort zone, but it's easy for me now, even as a speaker. So I've been doing this for about 12 years as a full-time speaker. You could say you can get complacent. And I can tell you now, I did a speech last week, and 1,500 people, enormous auditorium out in Spain. I get the nerves. And I think that is why you should never be complacent, because if you're complacent, it means you don't care. And you still need the fear, you still need the adrenaline kick. And also, you're only ever as good as your last flight, your last speech, your last expedition. And so if you're complacent, it's going to bite you.
Your last is an important one, because I remember listening to a video of yours and you spoke about your last mission.
Yeah.
And that moment where complacency almost, could have been quite dangerous.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Is that a story you'd be happy to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I was leading a mission in Iraq, and it was probably my first opportunity to actually lead and to step up. And the interesting thing in the military is people always think command and control, top-down approach. What actually happens is, if you actually think about it, in business, if you have the management team, senior leadership team, and then you have the team below, if the team below don't perform, you can laterally hire, can't you? You can say, okay, well, never mind, we're going to put it out on LinkedIn and we're going to get other people to come in. But the military don't have that option, because you need the experience, and the experience is only coming from the troops, from below. And so you have to get people at each stage of their career to actually practice being not just the next level up, but potential to see what's 2 levels up. And so they'll let you, push you to lead missions on the edge of your capability, edge of your comfort zone. And I was leading a mission in Iraq, and first ever mission I'd led, we were shot at by a surface-to-air missile. It was just as we were sweeping up our last target, which was reconnaissance. And I remember my nav just suddenly out of nowhere just yelled, "Break right!" It's a manoeuvre we'd practiced again a lot of times before. I did the manoeuvre, we put out all of our chaff and flares, all our countermeasures, and fortunately we managed to evade the missile through the fact that we did exactly what we were meant to do and the training had taught us to do. And the missile exploded about 2 miles away. And I remember sort of making a couple of sort of quite funny comments on the radio. I may have uttered a couple of quite elusive comments as well. But at that point, the whole mission changed. And once an aggressive act is made towards any of the formation or any of the coalition, and I think there were about 70 or 80 aircraft airborne that night, you're then given a retasking. And ours was to basically carry out an attack on a target. So we were quickly running out of fuel. I've got my formation. We need to come back together. It's middle of the night. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. It's pitch black. You're flying on night vision goggles, which are pretty challenging as well. So it's like looking through 2 toilet rolls. Got to constantly move your head around. There's a lot of weight on your helmet, so they're quite fatiguing. So we decided that we would head south into Saudi Arabia to try to locate an airborne tanker. We managed to find them and found it wasn't the British one we were expecting. It was an American one. I'd never tanked from this aircraft type before. And I said to my boss, who happened to be in the formation, "Sir, I'm not qualified." And he said, "Why not have a go? Lovely training environment, try something new." 2 o'clock in the morning, we've just been shot at. So I had 2 attempts to refuel, and I wasn't successful. And this is where I think it's really interesting when you think about training. They often say there can be no ego in leadership, and there can't be any ego. And that was a really important point, because I, at that point, said to my nav, "I'm stopping." And he just said, "Carry on." And I later discovered that the reason he said carry on to me was because his last job had been a trials officer, and he'd spent 3 years on the design and the development and the testing of the weapon that we were carrying that night, and it had never been dropped in any theatre before. And he was so desperate to sort of close that loop of all of his work for 3 years and drop this weapon in anger. And then suddenly he's got this pilot that can't refuel, and he's frustrated. So he says, "Carry on." But I thought, well, if I do carry on, it's going to prevent the rest of my team from having a go. And that's why it's really important when we understand what the tasking is, that we understand what is the purpose, what is the mission, what's the big picture. And I might not be able to get to it here, but actually because I understand the overarching mission, I can now work out how. So sometimes it's about the intention. It's not about the what you're going to do. It's going to be about the why and the how behind it. And so I recognise that the mission can still be accomplished, but it might not involve me due to lack of skill, training or experience. And so I stepped across on the wing, let my boss and my exec refuel. They were successful. They went back into Iraq, and I landed back at base. And I just remember feeling this real sense of failure. I was sort of hit by a bit of my imposter syndrome. Gosh, you shouldn't be here, you blah, and all these things. And then my nav just put his hand on my shoulder, that human contact, and he said, "Mandy, brilliant call. So sorry, I should never have said that and put you under pressure." And I asked him, what was it about? And he told me. And he said, "But you were thinking really rationally." And it makes you realise that so often, we bow down to experience. And we assume that just because someone's got a lot of experience, they're going to make the best calls. But often there's emotion involved with that experience. They could have been involved in a project for years. Excuse me. And it's going to be our junior people that are coming in that maybe they're seeing it with fresh eyes. You know, they're thinking in a different way. They're bringing different experiences to the equation. And they can't understand why you're doing it in this way that seems ridiculous to them. If we have that diversity of thought, which is so important in today's environment, then you're going to get a challenge. If we created the right environment that people feel empowered to challenge, that psychological safety we talk about, then ultimately you're going to get a different result. And he recognised that he had made a mistake, and he showed vulnerability as well at his level. You know, the boss showed me amazing leadership in empowering me to lead. So all in all, I think I learned probably more on that night than I have on any other. I'd learned about fear, not letting my team down. My fear was not being shot down, it was about failure. And I'd learned my stripes. I'd learned about leadership, my navs and my wingmen, my boss, the fact they'd empowered me to lead and they hadn't taken over when the going got tough. And I'd learned about decision making, you know, the fact that sometimes you've got to make decisions, you're going to be held accountable, and that's okay. That is okay to do that. You've got to step up when you need to.
Your NAV, which I believe stands for Navigator. Was Ringo. He was someone who was key to your journey.
Yeah.
How do you begin to operate as a team in that high stress, high urgency situations? And what's your advice for those of us out there who are learning to work in a team for the first time, whether it's a young student in a rugby team or a hockey team, whether it's someone like myself who's learning to lead a team for the first time when I've never done that before, and suddenly the first time I'm doing it in a jungle or a desert?
Well, I would say that trust is not going to come in the moment when you're in that jungle, when you're under pressure. Trust has been built up over many, many, months beforehand. Trust is built up by being authentic, by not running a blame game. When something goes wrong, showing vulnerability. Being a courageous leader is not about coming up with the strategy and shouting the loudest. It's about admitting when the strategy doesn't work and taking accountability for it. That is way more courageous than going, this is what we're doing, big goals, shout about them. Be the more human, the more vulnerable leader that's built trust within that team, so that when it comes to the push, to shove at that moment critique, when something does go wrong, everyone's got each other's back. And that doesn't just happen immediately. So it does take time. There is no better way of building trust than over time. But by displaying, and being that role model that you want to, if you could pick a leader of, the most outstanding leader that you've ever witnessed, let's think, say, Donald Trump. Now, I'm joking. Sorry, I told you I wouldn't go political. But, think of an amazing leader and you think, what did they do that inspired others? And often it's going to be the compassion that they showed. It's going to be authenticity. It's going to be vulnerability. And that's how we demonstrate it. And that's how you build trust.
Hearing you talk, I can tell why you're such a successful and prolific public speaker. And your audiences are lucky to listen to you because you have the incredible talent to not only have experienced things, which is one hard thing to go through, but then to actually turn it into a lesson. And there's so many people I look up to and role models and pioneers who don't want to share that advice, or they don't know how to.
Yeah.
But you have the talent to do both.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you.
My pleasure.
I'll pay you later, by the way, for that. Anyway.
Why at 38, after finding that passion and purpose that you strive for from a young age, why did you decide to step away?
So when you sign up to the military, I signed up and I was in a permanent commission that finished when I was 38. It's now 40. So it's a natural point to leave. Now, this is one thing that I do regret in my life. I don't do regret normally. I just think it's a futile emotion. It's a waste of time. But I regret two things. One, not buying one of the beach huts at Muddyford when they were a lot cheaper than they are.
Right.
They were 20,000 at the time and they're now 400. I was, damn, why did I not do that? That is a regret.
Okay.
But a real regret, actually, is that when I had children in the Air Force and I found a job that I could do, which would work around the fact that I wanted to be a mum, I hadn't wanted just to have children and then get someone else to look after them. I really wanted to be a mum to my two boys and to my two stepchildren as well. And I was never going to be able to do that by going back to the front line. So I found a second line job that had to be done by a Tornado pilot. But I was told if I ever took that job, I would never be promoted in the Air Force. And I just accepted that. I accepted it probably for two different reasons. One was that I was a mum of two young boys, and quite frankly, I was clinging on to life, just trying to get to work each day and try to manage them at home. But also, the second reason I didn't challenge it was because we didn't challenge things when we were told. Now, that gentleman that told me was he basically is your posting officer. He looks after your career. And he said, Mandy, the only way you would ever be promoted is if you went back to the front line when Tornado was deploying to Afghanistan. I was breastfeeding a 4-month-old baby. That wasn't going to work. Or I went to RAF Valley as an instructor. And that wasn't really going to work because my husband was flying out of Gatwick. So unless we split up and I took the two children up who were 4 months old and 17 months old, nightmare, to RAF Valley, and I was then flying, I just couldn't see how it would work and he wouldn't get to be a dad. And so I took this job accepting I'd never be promoted. But why did I not challenge the status quo? Why I didn't challenge and say, but why? Just because that's the way it's always been, because you've never had a female pilot that's had children who wants to carry on working and wants to come back at some point, why can there not be more flexibility? Now, there is now. Okay. The military have had to change. They've had to adapt. And so people can take sabbaticals. You know, actually COVID forced more changes upon the military than I could ever care to have imagined. But I don't know why in some ways I didn't just challenge it more. But by then I'd done my 38 years, my 38th birthday, I'd done my just under 17 years. And my two boys were now 4 and 5. And I thought, do you know what? I'm ready to go, because I'd done really what I'd wanted to do in the military. But not one person ever said to me, would I consider staying? Crazy. £3.5 million for the training, you know, frontline experience, very few women doing it. Not one person said, would you be interested in staying if we could find you the next job? But by then I'd set my heart on leaving, and I recognised that there was another world out there. And that was another huge leap of faith, because I assumed that I had one skill set, which was being a pilot. So I trained to be an airline pilot, because that's what everyone does. And then it was only through a very fortuitous conversation at a dinner party, when I was quite drunk, if I'm really honest, and a very good friend of mine, Harvey, and Harvey suggested that I take the speech or the story I just told in a drunken haze, and it would make a really good after dinner or a really good keynote speech for a conference. And I sort of said, don't know what you're talking about, never been to a conference in my life. He took me to a conference, and then he gave me an opportunity. And that's when I did that appalling speech for him, where I had it on cards. I read it. But it was a stepping stone that really led to a very different life. But, you know, when we talk of fear, my God, I was more fearful of doing that speech than I think I was flying in Iraq.
Are you serious?
Yeah, honestly. It's crazy,
because
isn't it?
you didn't have the training that you had at the
No
time,
training
because
at all.
you didn't have those drills ready if something goes wrong or goes right. Absolutely.
Fear of the unknown. What happens if they laugh at me? What I then realised, and this would be my biggest top tip for anyone that has to do a speech of any sort, people do say that there's a huge fear that people have of standing and speaking in front of people, is no one knows if you're going to get it right or wrong. Often it's your story. And the big thing I would say to anyone is it's the story that matters. It's not the facts and the figures. You can send all of the sales figures to the team beforehand. Pick out one sales story that has made a difference, that is really going to resonate. Because do you know what? No one will remember that you've made a 21% increase in this area and a 2% down here. They will remember the emotional connection of the story. You know, just say, I'll send you all the figures afterwards. Let's have some stories.
Well, people remember how you made them feel, not
necessarily
what you said.
Yeah, the emotional connection.
Some of the best advice I was ever given for public speaking was just go up there and share your story. No one knows your story better than you. So no one can share it better than you. Just go off and tell it.
And believe in yourself as well. And also remember that no one is in the audience going, I really hope they fail. I really hope that they make a mistake and they fall off. No one is doing that in the audience. The audience are sitting there going, please share your story. I want to hear it. You know, and you can visibly see when you start, audiences almost go, oh, there's a collective sigh in the audience when they go, I'm in capable hands and this is going to be great fun.
I think you're a great role model for all of us, and I encourage everyone to go out there and to read your books. You've got 2 very successful books, An Officer, Not a Gentleman, and now An Officer and a Gentleman. But can we finish with this question? You are the truest definition of someone who's broken barriers, who has that never give up attitude. What is your advice out there for young people, for anyone who's going through a time of adversity in their life? Maybe it is a young girl who's facing barriers in her world, whatever that may be. What's your advice out there?
It's a really hard one, because I do think that the world at the moment is in a really tough place for young people. So I have a 21-year-old and a 22-year-old. So it's sort of quite easy for me at this moment to be reflecting on what advice I'd give them. And it's about trying to find what it is you love doing. And that's really hard, because for a lot of people, I think, I don't really know what I love doing. Finding a purpose, finding something that is not just looking at a screen and believing all the influencers that they just drive a Ferrari and it happens immediately. It doesn't. It's rubbish. It's about real connections. And when we finally realise it's about the real connections that we get from people, from humans, and putting ourselves out there, it's about experiencing things. It's about making yourself uncomfortable, and it's about growing. And so I would say, if you can find, a challenge, do something that makes you feel slightly uncomfortable, that you can grow from. You might find that it's that thing that you go, oh my God, I really love the fact that I got the opportunity to meet other people, to talk to them, that I got to communicate. I really love the fact that I got behind the camera. You might discover skills that you didn't know you had in doing something that was outside of your ordinary. And then when you find those things that you like doing, work out how that can be your career. How can that become your passion and make that your purpose? And then have a belief that you can do it. But I mean, my motto has always been dream it, believe it, do it. And that's very easy to flippantly say, because we can have dreams. You've had huge dreams. You can even have a belief in achieving that dream. But do you know what? That's all irrelevant if you're not willing to put it into practice, and you're not willing to put your money where the mouth is and actually say, I'm going to action it. I'm going to do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the mission of this show in many ways.
Yeah.
It's the reason the show is called If You Can. It's inspired by the poem If by Rudyard Kipling.
Yeah.
And my favourite line of the poem is, if you can dream and not make dreams your master. If you can dream but not be so scared of them that you never actually make them happen. I think that's the perfect place to end. Mandy, thank you very much for the honour of interviewing you.
Louis. No, honestly, it's been a real pleasure, and I think you are also a huge inspiration to so many people that follow your journey as well. So keep on doing your amazing work too.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi everyone, and thank you very much for tuning into this week's episode of If You Can with the incredible Mandy Hickson. Mandy had this ability to turn some of the most extreme experiences of life into practical lessons, which we can all embrace into our own lives. And walking out the studio, I was very quickly reminded of how lucky I am to have started this show, to sit down once a week with someone so incredible who I do admire. And I'm sure there's so many key takeaways that we're all going to take into our lives. So I really do hope you were able to take away something from it. And thank you again to Mandy for coming on the show. But of course, it is now time for Bob's Everyday Hero, our weekly segment to finish the show, where we give a shout out and a thank you and a big well done to one of you, to one of our If You Can listeners who's achieved something great. It can be big, it can be small. It could be a personal goal, a work goal. Maybe you're working towards your first 10K or your first marathon. Maybe it's a moment of kindness. You can nominate yourself, a friend, a family member, a colleague, anyone. Just have to drop us an email at louis@ifyoucanhq.com to be nominated. And each week we send out a Bob Shout Pack for the story we pick to support you on your own journey, on your own adventure of life, shall we say. And this week's email comes from Jamie. I'm going to read his email to you now. Hi Louis, after listening to your chat with Lennox Lewis, who was our amazing guest last week, it made me think of my old boxing coach, Jordan. He runs a small local gym and gives up a lot of his evenings helping young people learn how to box. But more than that, he teaches them confidence, discipline, and just gives them somewhere positive to be. He's been doing it for years, and I know he's made a real difference to a lot of people, me included. Thought he deserved a shout out. Best, Jamie. Well, Jamie, thank you first of all for dropping us an email. And Jordan absolutely deserves a shout out by the sounds of it. How incredible. There is so many unsung heroes up and down the country who do so much for young people in sport. It's amazing. And Jordan is clearly one of those. It's also great after hearing Lennox mention last week about the power of sport and how it has the ability to change lives for young people. And this right here is evidence of that. So thank you, Jamie, for sharing Jordan's story, and to say thank you to both of you and a small well done. and keep going. We're going to send you out both a Bob Share pack to support you on your journeys. So thank you everyone again for listening to this week's episode of If You Can. Please do continue supporting, liking, following, subscribing. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, as well as Instagram and TikTok. And your support means the world. It means we can continue to deliver our mission of great guests with great lessons to support us all on our journey. So thank you. And a big thank you to Bob, our founding sponsor, for believing in us too. We'll see you next week for the next episode of If You Can. Bye, everyone.